the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast, the ultimate insider's guide for all things ocean shipping. Brought to you by NYSEX, helping you deliver through volatility.
Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast. I'm your co-host, Caroline Weaver, and with me is Lars Jensen. Lars, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, calling in from sunny France, being roughly in the middle of the country at the Atlantic coastline.
Awesome. It looks beautiful. You can see the sunshine reflecting off the window pane. All right, let's get started talking about the NYFI read for this week. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and let's talk about where the Asia to U.S. West Coast rates are right now.
Yeah, starting on what's the mainstay of Pacific. Compared to last week, the average is up at about $100.40. If we look into the sub-indices, as you are showing here, the $100 increase covers a $750 increase from Northeast Asia, whereas the two other sub-trades are basically stagnating. So this is all driven by Northeast Asia. And it is reminiscent to a talk that we have had a few times before with Northeast Asia kind of having this fluctuation.
It kind of seems that it hasn't really been doing that same pattern maybe over the last couple of months as severely as it was previously. You can see the line going around the average.
Yes. Yeah, it followed nicely as the market was going up. Then it actually fell back here a couple of weeks ago, but has certainly taken revenge here over the last week. At least revenge if you are a shipper unfortunate enough to have had to pay for exporting spot cargo from either Japan or Korea over the past week.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the Asia to U.S. East Coast rates now, too. I think that would be a good trade lane to touch on. So if we have them pulled up here, can you tell us what's going on with this trade lane?
Again, most extreme, with Northeast Asia seeing massive increases if you wanted to ship into the West Coast, but actually a decline if we are moving into the East Coast. I think unsettled is the understatement we talk about rates. We spoke about the spread last week, and actually the spreads for both the US East Coast and US West Coast remains at very elevated levels, above $2,000 per.
Yeah, that's definitely substantial. I think on the note of spread, it might be good to touch on Asia to North Europe and see what's going on with that one as well.
Because if we look at the Asia and Europe, overall, we're seeing rates going up $300 40 foot, which is more of an increase than we have seen on the Pacific, for sure. Is it a little bit of a deceleration in the pace of change? Yeah, you can argue that. But I think what's more important here is also we're now seeing an increase in the spread. The spread has now reached $1,400, $1,400 between the 10 and 40%. And that is a distinct increase in recent weeks in terms of spread. And as we have talked before, the more the spread widens, the more there is an indication of a somewhat unsettled market. So it would appear that the market conditions are slowly getting more unsettled on Asia, North Europe, which again would tally with a growing uncertainty in terms of when does this peak season actually end and when does it not?
Yeah, a question a lot of people probably would like the answer to.
Yeah.
All right, thanks for reviewing that with us. It would probably be good to touch on the Strait of Hormuz and what's going on there.
We are adding a voiceover to dictate Lars's comments in this section due to poor connection. For the Strait of Hormuz compared to last week, things have just gone from bad to much, much worse. As we are recording this, there are full-on hostilities between both parties conducting multiple attacks. The strait itself is effectively completely closed down. Just overnight, a tanker vessel was reported as being suddenly on fire off the Omani coast. This is in the Salalah area. The latest news is that the vessel fire is out of control and the crew has abandoned ship. Sadly, there is absolutely no improvement on the Strait of Hormuz. It is as closed as it has been over the last 5 months of hostilities.
Okay. And so are we seeing any changes with the carriers in terms of routings? I know we've seen maybe some shifts, not just in the Strait of Hormuz, but we've had some discussion about the Red Sea and things that are going on there.
What we have seen over the last few weeks is, and we have discussed this before, we have seen both Maersk and Hapag-Lloyd send their Gemini service back through the Suez routing. Maersk has shifted 2 more of their services, the MECL and the West Africa 6 service. And basically, until the point where you and I are talking here, they have not made any changes to that plan. The reason I am being suddenly a lot more hesitant is the newsflash that came out. A press conference was held by the Houthis just a couple of hours ago. During that press conference, the Houthis have now officially declared a maritime blockade on Saudi Arabia. And the reason this becomes interesting, there is a substantial amount of traffic that goes between Asia and the Red Sea that calls Saudi Arabia, especially ports like Jeddah and King Abdullah. This becomes a problem. The Houthis have provided absolutely zero details right now. So what does that blockade mean? Does that mean they are going to interdict or potentially attack any and all ships destined to call Saudi Arabia or originating in Saudi Arabia? If that is the case, this certainly presents a problem, not only for the carriers like CMA, CGM, Maersk, and Hapag-Lloyd, but it also presents a sudden and acute problem for all the niche carriers who have been operating through that strait unmolested for the last 2 years and who are right now providing a vital service for bypass cargo to Saudi Arabia with the Strait of Hormuz closed. So we have to wait and see what kind of action the Houthis will put behind their words. But if it is to be taken at face value, this would actually seriously increase the problem related to the Strait of Hormuz, because the Saudi cargo that used to go in through the Persian Gulf from Asia and now goes through the Red Sea into Saudi ports like Jeddah would now suddenly also be directly impacted.
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing a widening of the geographical impact of this conflict.
Yes.
So has there been any change in terms of bunker fuel? We've seen the price of oil increase. So are we expecting to see BAF increase? Is that coming? Has that already started happening?
Technically, yes, we are going to see it coming. We've seen bunker prices over the last 2 weeks increase 11%, which is a very sharp increase in just a couple of weeks. The way we are going to see it is most bunker surcharges follow the average bunker fuel price. So technically speaking, this would then be coming in the shippers' fourth quarter bunker surcharges. We cannot rule out that we will see the carriers pursue the same playbook that they also did when the crisis started. So we might see announcement of increases to emergency bunker fuel surcharges. How successful that will be is not one question. Today, this increase will certainly be passed through.
Something to keep an eye out on over the coming months. Any other news that you want to talk about for this region of the world?
A couple of things just to touch upon as well. As we fortunately see, the Somali pirates are on the up and up. We saw a vessel that was first boarded and later on actually brought into Somali waters here over the last 48 hours. So we now have an active piracy situation with a vessel that has been hijacked and abducted. So this simply adds to the risk. And the other thing I want to ask is just to follow up on the conversation we had here on the podcast a week ago, where we had Trump proposing a 20% toll on traffic in Hormuz. Our conversation at the time was that it basically at that point only existed in social media, and that meant that there was no guarantee it would ever make it into the real world. And that turned out to be absolutely correct, because less than a day after we had the podcast, the proposed 20% toll suddenly disappeared again, replaced by a statement from Trump. The Gulf countries would pay this by investing an unnamed number of billions of dollars in the U.S. Whether that then happens or not is equally mysterious as the toll. So I think for now, we should take all of this as social media chatter by the president.
All right. Appreciate the update there. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about tariffs. So recently there was a new 25% tariff announced. Can you talk about who's impacted there?
Yeah, is Brazil, and that actually comes into force 2 days from now on July 22nd. And it's a 25 tariff largely composed of commodities, and it's under what's called Section 301. This should be seen as a harbinger of likely coming for a bunch of other countries, not necessarily at the same level, because the U.S. needs to come up with new tariffs, because the old ones replacing the IEEPA are being phased out here over the coming week. Furthermore, we might also see additional tariffs come on top of Brazil. Just for historical context here, we should remember last year Brazil was slapped with a 50% tariff under IEEPA. And unlike most other countries, this was not only justified by trade policy, this was also justified by dissatisfaction on the part of the U.S. administration with the legal process ongoing regarding former Brazilian President Bolsonaro. Not only is this a large new tariff coming on Brazil, but we should not forget that when it comes to tariffs on Brazil, this is not just trade policy. There's also other political overtones coming into this.
Yeah, it definitely seems to be that way. So it sounded like the goods that were impacted things like apparel, steel, sugar, timber, but there are some exceptions to the tariff. So you got beef, coffee, energy products. So definitely not across the board, but interesting development for sure. Let's talk about the inventory levels. So we have new data that came out recently. What was the latest there, and what's the impact?
Yeah, the latest is, and this is where perspective matters a lot, because on one hand, we've seen a very sharp drop in U.S. inventories. On the other hand, we've seen an increase. It all matters how you measure it. If you measure the inventory as a percentage of sales, so the relative inventory, we have seen an extremely sharp drop in inventories. Actually, this is the third largest drop that we have seen over a period ever since inventories will begin to be measured over in the US. We've only seen sharper drops when the pandemic hit us and when the financial crisis hit us. And that, of course, can be a key driver on why we have seen such a strong market and such strong freight rates on the Trans-Pacific. There's an inventory piece. But the other perspective is, this is the relative inventory. The reason it has dropped sharply is because the sales numbers have soared. There's extremely strong sales. If you look at the actual size of the inventories themselves, they keep increasing. And that means if sales suddenly tapers off, this relative inventory is got to go through the book. And an inventory destocking right now going on, that means that we are walking on a knife edge in terms of the inventory levels over in the US. If sales continue, and again, you've got to give it to the US consumers, they are phenomenal. So if they keep buying at the pace they're buying now, perfectly fine, the current inventory restock. But if they retract on spending, we are heading back into a massive overshoot on the inventories. That's basically what happened.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. It'll be interesting to see over the coming months, like through summer, what happens with the inventory levels, and then comparing that with the freight rates, because we're obviously seeing extremely high freight rates right now.
Yes.
So the timing of these patterns will be interesting as they unfold. All right. Let's talk about the ETS rules that are coming out of the EU. What was announced there?
Yeah, part of the ETS process in Europe is the European Commission here on Friday issued, not new rules, but they issued what they propose for changes for the rules as part of their political process. And we should keep in mind, in shipping, when we talk about ETS, it is only a small corner of the European ETS. ETS covers all industries. It covers manufacturing, mining, everything. But some of the elements that are most important ones. And then there's also an opening of a discussion in terms of effects, because right now, if you are calling transship inside of 300 nautical miles of EU, you cannot count it as a non-EU port. But the only port right now that's part of that package is Tangiers in Morocco and Port Said in Egypt. There are proposals to be discussed to increase the number of ports included in this, and that's basically to prevent what is called euphemistically spillover. Some would also call it cheating. It would depend on how this political process unfolds. But it seems clear that these negotiations will lead to a slightly longer phase-in period of governmental regulations, but also a stern look at whether there are loopholes that need to be closed.
We'll keep an eye on that and report accordingly. The last topic that we wanted to talk about today were some low water surcharges that have cropped up by different carriers recently. Can you tell us what's going on there?
Yeah. With the risk of sounding slightly callous, it sounds like almost the world's running out of water. Because we have already talked about the issues with the Panama Canal that might have problems later in the year in terms of El Niño. But we have now also, over the last couple of weeks, seen carriers begin to introduce low water surcharges in the St. Lawrence Seaway up in Canada. It's coming in the Rhine River that is running desperately short on water to the point where supply services are needed to be closed down. We're now also seeing low water surcharges announced for low water problems in the Amazon River going up to Manaus. So again, as I said, it might sound a little bit callous, the world is running out of water. But at least for these key navigable waterways that the major shipping lines are using, low water is clearly becoming a problem.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like it. It seems a little alarming that it's across multiple continents happening all at the same time. But is it because it's summer? Is that common to happen around this time of year?
It's not unusual water issues, but it does appear that there has been some bouts of extremely warm weather in places around the world, and that seems to drive it.
Yeah. All right. Lars, is there anything else you want to add to today's episode? I know we've covered quite a lot of ground today.
Yeah, I think this should be enough to send the listeners' minds into overdrive in terms of saying, what does this mean for me? So I don't think we should burden them with more stuff.
All right. Deal. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. If you haven't subscribed already, we're on Apple Music, Spotify, YouTube. We also have a newsletter that recaps what we talk about in today's episode, including the graphs that we show on the screen in case you're only listening. If you want to subscribe to that, it is in the show notes. We will be back next week, and until then, I hope everyone has an awesome, productive week. Bye, y'all.
Thanks for listening to the Supply Chain Secrets Podcast, presented by NYSHEX. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app.